My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm delighted and honored to be your host, your guide focused on investing in women and taking stock of where the private sector and beyond has progressed in driving inclusive innovation to launch the CEO Talk series, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to begin today by inviting you all to join me on a journey. And we begin 50 years ago when ADB was first founded. 5 decades ago, most countries in the Asia Pacific were poor, facing significant liquidity constraints and limited access to finance. Fast forward years later, while we do have more work to be done, many member ADB countries today are middle income, and Asia Pacific is almost synonymous with emerging growth and explosive growth. And alongside, or perhaps I argue core to this economic growth, is that things seem to be looking up for women in the region. We are seeing more women in leadership, more conversations on gender equality, and of course, who could forget the global Me Too movement that placed a spotlight on not just the business community, the corporate community, but on our humanity as a whole, raising questions about how we interact with each other and what it is that we have all truly condoned. I argue that it also places the important question before us. If we leave the world as it is today, is this the sort of world that we are proud to live to our daughters and our sons? Or are we capable of doing better? The good news is that today, globally, women are graduating at a much higher rate than ever before. In Malaysia, where I come from, women make up 50.4% of local graduates, and that number is steadily increasing. Across many countries, women make up about half the labor force. And women, in some pockets, are making strides on the political front. In Asia Pacific, women's representation in parliament has increased over the past 2 decades. This figure rose to 20% in 2020. And while I'm an optimist, we all know that this only tells one side of the story. While women make up almost half the labor force worldwide, today they hold, at best, by region, 30% of managerial positions. In some of the worst performing countries studied by the World Economic Forum and recently, yesterday by the Credit Suisse Gender 3000, women make up less than 7% of managerial positions. Those countries include, ladies and gentlemen, Japan and Pakistan. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, the elephant in the room. The fact that women have been pushed out of the workforce through COVID-19 and that these loss of jobs cost women around the world at least 800 billion in earnings, a figure that is more than the combined GDP of 98 countries, according to Oxfam. Why should this She session alarm us all? Because the resilience and the growth of economies depend on women's workforce participation. Because women's earnings are crucial for many families' economic security. Because if women participated in the economy identically to men, we know global GDP would increase significantly. And ultimately, make no mistake, there will be no post-COVID recovery without women's economics prospects recovery. Often I'm asked, what is the answer? How can we change this? And of course, the problem is nuanced. It is structural, it is cultural, it is institutional, but I think the answer starts with us all examining the lens to which we evaluate our world. A quote I like is that we live by the paradigms we know. And until you and we collectively change this paradigm, nothing will truly change. How are we raising our sons and our daughters? I come from a region, as many of you, where this term of leftover women, or shungi, is still very much alive. The concept that she, after a certain age, call it 28, 29, and is unmarried, she is leftover, expired goods, which means that still in 2021, ladies and gentlemen, we are judged by the ring on our fingers and not our professional success as women. And though you might think this cannot translate to the numbers that we just talked about, think again. Are we letting our boys play in the dirt and experiment in the sandbox and telling our girls not to dirty that dress, stay clean and be careful? Are we still placing the burden of parenthood, which by the way is a 2-person job, on the shoulders of women alone? For months, global job reports have painted a dire picture of the pandemic's deep and disproportionate impact on women. Many blame the pandemic entirely, but what the pandemic has truly revealed is the shaky economic ground for which women have always stood. What does inclusive innovation mean to you, and what role do companies and organizations like yours play in advancing this goal?
Thanks very much, Sarah. It's a really interesting question because I think inclusive innovation means different things to different people. But pardon me, from a development finance perspective, this, I think, also covers risk innovation. It's about your risk appetite. And for me, it's about moving away from the perceptions that failures for women's businesses are called out, and providing an excuse, for example, to avoid financing women-led businesses as a target. It's also about empowering the potential of both male and female employees and managers to address gender stereotypes. I think we need to actually provide the guidance and help in what does that mean. It's about personal leadership as a role in advancing diversity and inclusion, to not accept certain behaviors or accept certain behaviors or encourage that. And I think that that's also what leadership is about. And I think it's about, when we're talking about risk innovation, it's also about giving women opportunities that they may not otherwise have. I think that, banks like ADB, which are traditionally infrastructure banks, have been involved in heavily traditionally male-dominated sectors. I think that we can actually provide leadership and direction on this about mainstreaming or bringing in gender inclusion type of opportunities, but also having the risk appetite to do that. So it covers a whole broad range of areas, and I think that we are definitely striving to a more inclusive and innovative model. Of course, we don't have it all figured out yet, but I think that working together, I think, is the most important part of it. It's a partnership, and I think that, we're all very focused on achieving that goal.
Thanks, Suzanne. And, talking about risk and women, who better than to address this issue than Roshani herself? I mean, Roshani, you have had really an illustrious career, meeting Dr. Yunus himself, who encouraged you to go and do it in Pakistan and include the women and make this happen, and gave you a 10,000 check as I understand it. So talk to us a little bit here, how women are used to be viewed as a risk, but in fact, you've actually seen the opposite.
It's not even about being gender-centric when we design financial products. We have to be gender-intentional, which means that we are very clear in understanding the challenges that women face as an entity, and then designing around them. Designing around those challenges so we can help women make better financial decisions. So if I go back in time, one of the things that's really worked for women when we were going out there to do research, when we were setting up Kush, one of the things we realized that there was safety in numbers when it comes to women. Women prefer to be associated, or women, the notion of being together as a group was something that worked for women. So the concept of group lending is what we saw in Bangladesh. I learned from Dr. Yunus's experience and brought it back to Pakistan. The idea was that we set up groups of women who would take joint responsibility for each other. And that really worked, because women alone having to configure and to transact businesses was very scary. Because there were insurmountable challenges when it came in terms of not just the economic barriers, but the social barriers that we faced. So one of the things we did realize is if you're gender intentional, you wear the lens, the point that you were raising, we really need to change the way we view women. That was one. The second piece was really investability, demonstrating the case for investing in women. So when we started out in 1995, for every dollar that was provided as microloans in Pakistan, only 20 cents went to women. So women were really not part of the bandwidth. And when we went out there to see the 20% that were being served, it was men who were using that money. So it was given to women, but the agency or the pipelining or the use of the money was with the men. So one of the other things we had to do was, and I think that's something we all have to do even today, because there are still questions around why women, why do we need to invest in them? I think we need to put that debate aside and really show the evidence and the numbers. So I will talk a little bit more in the rest of the panel, but one of the things we did do was we demonstrated that investing in women, setting up an organization that caters only to women and women's running micro businesses across the country could be sustainable. Kash was the first organization in Pakistan in 2003 to become sustainable as a microfinance entity. So we showed that not only were we investing in women, we were providing them loans. Women were better credit risk. They invested in businesses that earned them revenues, and ultimately they invested in their families. And the institution that supported them was also sustainable.
Yeah, and that reminds me of the African proverb. If you want to move forward, you invest in women, and women will bring the world along with them. You know, COVID-19 has been tough for a lot of us. And the reality is that in a time of crisis, in a time of heightened risk, a lot of leaders are almost backsliding. And I see this in my world in venture capital, that people are backsliding to pattern matching patterns of the past, right? So pattern matching can be a mask for unconscious bias. You know, that's something I say a lot. How are you in Fiji Airways being careful about, you know, moving forward here post-COVID? What is new normal? What does building forward look like?
Sarah, we realized very soon when we started grounding our entire aircraft fleet and suspending all our services that the way we had done business was what got us there wouldn't work in the future. So we did a lot of research and we adopted a future fit strategy. We brought in specialists on NLP, on Enneagram, and we've changed the culture to a learning organization. Where previously it was a select few that were the privileged to get learning, we have a much wider learning base today. And I've never seen such, I've said the other day to someone, the people here are so hungry to learn, I can't give them enough. And I tell you that culture change came from the women in our team. And I've seen the men shifting as well. So it's very, very positive. And so we're really looking forward to, I say to everyone, I can start flying tomorrow. We're targeting 1 December, but I wish it's tomorrow because we're so ready. And the team have made it happen like that by including them, by having women driving innovation and that common purpose that we live, eat, and sleep every day in the organization.
Thank you, Andre. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of this really power pack session. I mean, we covered everything from being gender intentional, you know, thinking and designing around the structures that we work around, right? Looking at CVs as hiring managers and not looking at a career break as, oh no, this is a bad thing. And looking at investability of women and also measuring that impact, not just saying that this is the right thing to do, the smart thing to do, but documenting that change and how that transformational leadership really cuts across throughout the organization. So, you know, this really brings me to a very popular quote, perhaps to some people, but, you know, a quote that I like by Mae Jemison, the first African-American woman to travel into space. The future didn't just happen, it is created. And it is my sincere hope that this panel has been helpful to you in that it's given you tactical steps and that it's also shown that, you know, there are many forms of leadership that this conversation should be mainstreamed. And as, of course, pointed out in the comments here, it is not an attack on men. It is not an attack into our private lives, but really acknowledging the fact that our private lives, our social constructs, especially in Asia and Pacific, matters. And our tone and narrative matters into what we see in the world. So thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for this Pulpac session. My name is Sarah Chen. Invest in women because it's not just the right thing to do, but the smart thing to do.